Okay, hello. So, welcome to this first little video. Who knows what I'm going to do with it? Who knows where it's going to go? I just had the idea, so I thought I'd run with it, I suppose. So, a little breakdown of some Ultimate Frisbee plays. So, this, if I decide to do more of them, is just going to be a little kind of series of videos, varying in length, depending on what I decide to put in them. Just breaking down some Ultimate Frisbee plays, some tactics, some mentalities, and just a few ways of thinking when you're playing the game. So for this first one, I had a bit of an idea as I was stood in my kitchen. I just thought this is quite a useful way of thinking, and it's one of the things that goes through my mind when I play. So I've drawn out a pitch, Ultimate Frisbee pitch. It's obviously just a rough estimate size-wise. So we've got the two end zones on the left and the right, and then we've got the playing area, the main playing field in the middle, and then we've got the two X's a third of the way up the pitch, well, roughly a third of the way up the pitch from each end zone, which we know as the brick marks. So that should look somewhat familiar to you. And then we've got 7 red dots who are our offense players. The black circle is the disc, so obviously the offensive player up here is our handler. Then we've got our dump handler, and then we've got our stack over here. And in this example, our blue lines are our force, or our defensive players. So as you can see, they are set up as you would. So we've got the offensive team in a... Okay, let's just start from the beginning here with how they're set up. So these videos are just going to kind of be one-take things. So they're not fancy voiceovers or anything. It's just going to be me talking whilst I do it. So we've got our offense here in red, stuck on the sideline. Maybe it was a really good pull. They got it just up one pass, or that's where it landed. And they're stuck on the sideline. So we've got our offensive handler on the sideline. We've got his stack, or their stack, on a slight diagonal part way up the pitch. So... obviously, when we're stuck on a sideline, it's quite a common play to put the stack on a diagonal to create more space. And then obviously we've got the dump handler a little way off from the main handler. So the mentality that I just wanted to talk about in this video is this space, really. So obviously, when we're stuck on a sideline, we kind of have two options. We can either swing the disc and we can get it back into the middle, or we can try and push it up the sideline, which some teams know as up the line, some teams know it as a ram. I'm sure you've all got different names for it, but those kind of are our two options when we are on the sideline, typically. So a lot of people will opt for this, because you're centralising the disc, you're getting it back into the centre, and obviously you've got this whole area to play with if you can get the disc back into the middle. In this situation, obviously we have the force stopping this around throw, stopping the swing into the middle. Okay, so they're a really strong force. They're not letting anything out on the break side. So this option isn't on in this example. Okay, so that leaves us with an up the line movement. So obviously this at the moment is our open side, and the difference here compared to a play that's starting here is your open side of the pitch is a lot smaller, because if you were starting here, you've got an entire half the pitch to play with. However, when you're stuck on a sideline, you have the the extra defender being the sideline. So the open side here is a much smaller window than if we were in the middle of the pitch, which obviously brings its own difficulties. Hence why I thought this would be a really good thing to go over. So if we look at where the mark is and we look at the open availability, if you draw a diagonal line, this is kind of your open side throwing area. So it's obviously a much narrower window than if you were anywhere else on the pitch. So the open side throw is obviously still going to be the easier throw to make, but it has to be a lot more precise, as it kind of has to hit this area. And on the same kind of, the same token, the cuts coming from the stack, you're also cutting into a much smaller space than if you were cutting into half a pitch. So that brings me on to the kind of main point that I wanted to get into with this video. So we've got this kind of cone shape, essentially, of where we're trying to get the disc. So with and up the line, you're not trying to get it super far, because you could get a poach coming and stopping that. You're not trying to get it super close, because that's just never necessarily the best kind of thing to do. Obviously, if you're short on options, getting something that's only a yard or two in front is going to be viable. But ideally, you want it somewhere here, which is a bit of a yard gainer. It's moving up the line, it's resetting the disc, okay? So that's the kind of area that you want to be aiming for. So as I was stood there in my kitchen thinking about this, the kind of mindset and the thought process I was getting myself into is, what is the best option here? If you want to move the disc into that cone, how should you approach it? What is the best way of getting the disc there? So obviously, straight off the bat, a lot of people would think, well, you can just have a cut from the stack as you normally would. They can cut into this space and they can take the disc. So let's say we've got the front of stack here. They can make this cut and they can receive the disc there, okay? That's one option. So we've got this cut here, straight off the front of the stack. Similarly, we've got a cut from the back of the stack, so we could have a fake deep and then cutting all the way under, receive the disc. Practically the same cut, different points in the stack, depends on what your team likes to do the most, cut from the front, cut from the back. But those are our two stack cutting options, so deep and under, or if we're going from the front, just a straight under. And I thought to myself, that's kind of the typical move here, I think. Or we've got the second option, well, third or second, but the second main option, which is the dump handler, who I've highlighted here, can do some kind of fake, some little shimmy, some kind of run towards their mark, and then they can do a really hard cut up the line. Okay, so that's something that we will have seen quite often. So it will be a run towards and then straight up the line to receive the disc. And then typically what you'll get to complement that is you'll get the front of the stack coming back, making a cut as a reset option if the cut up the line didn't work. So with teams that I've played with in the past, that's something that I've been quite fond of. I think it's a really good move. I really like handler movements. I think they're really powerful if you can get your handlers moving the disc between them. Lots of give-go movements, lots of quick passes. I'm a big fan of that personally. So if we go with that option, I think you're getting the yardage from the dump handler going up line, and you're also getting a safe reset option from the front of your stack. So if we compare those kind of two options, so the cut from the stack, whether that be the front or the back, and then the cut from the dump handler up line, comparing those two options, at first glance we may think to ourselves, both are completely viable and both just as good as each other. However, I was breaking it down in my head, and I am a true believer and I will explain my reasoning behind it in a moment, that this option, moving the dump handler up the line, is the stronger option, wherever possible. And this is my reasoning. So, if I select another colour here. So, we've got our cone shape that I mentioned earlier in the video. This is what we're throwing into, okay? And this is also what we're cutting into. So, the throw is going to be the same regardless. The disc is going to move this way. So the disc is moving into the cone. So if you consider the cone a funnel, it's going from the thin end to the fat end. And the disc is always going to go that way in this scenario. The disc can't magically start over here and go that way. That's not going to happen, okay? So the disc is going that way, which is great. So now it comes down to a case of the cutters. Let's analyse what the cutter's going to do. So in this scenario, we're going to go from the back of the stack. They're going to do a little fake, then they're going to come under. Let's look at where they're cutting, how they're cutting. They're cutting from this nice fat end into this small space. And this is really where the two options differ. So they're cutting from a bigger area into a smaller area. And that is where this, to me, isn't as effective as the dump handler up the line. Because the dump handler is coming from this smaller area and they are cutting into the bigger, wider target area, so to speak. So hopefully just by me kind of demonstrating that, you've kind of got what I mean. I'm going to try and break it down with words and visuals. So throwing the disc into this area, you're limiting yourself. If you're using the back of stack or front of stack, whoever it may be, you're limiting yourself to a much smaller zone and you're giving yourself a much smaller margin of error. So by cutting towards the sideline, by cutting towards the handler into this small area, the disc has to be so much more precise and the cut has to be so much harder into that space. Compared to if this dump handler goes up the line into the wider area where they've got more room to play with, and that ultimately gives them more time to receive the disc, and you don't have to be the most precise thrower, the most precise cutter to receive the disc in that area. So I'm going to leave it there for my first video. It's just something to think about. I don't know what I'm going to do with this ultimately. I may just review it and think that's rubbish, it's too long. I'm going to go over it again, do it, make it shorter. But that's my first video. Cool. Thanks for watching. Bye.